The year is 2021, March 17th. Mojang releases a new snapshot called Snapshot 21W11A, where they introduce a game-changing new mechanic, waxed copper. With this new Miyagi-pleasing feature, no longer would copper roofs and statues be destined to slowly wither away, a bitter reminder of the passage of time, a dynamic, breathing element in an otherwise unchanging world. Now, if you wished, weathered copper would not just be an inevitable intermediate texture in your build, but a deliberate, permanent feature, a choice. My redstone-infested brain saw opportunity in this, specifically in the two intermediate stages of copper, exposed copper and weathered copper. These would be the most rare copper variants, I thought as I huffed the red powder, since they need to be waxed at exactly the right time, no sooner, no later. As it turns out, the oxidation of copper can be reversed, but it's pretty hard. It involves striking the blocks with lightning, which is most easily done with a channeling trident, a lightning rod, and a thunderstorm. Because of this, producing large quantities of waxed, exposed, and weathered copper would be an exercise in both patience and timing. Mr. Miyagi would be proud. But what if I could build a machine that watches copper oxidize, waxes it at the exact right time, and even harvests it? Well, I'd be rich. It was a genius idea. My key to copper riches beyond my wildest dreams. So I set out to make this industrial monstrosity. I poured hours into iteration after iteration. Return rates, TNT consumption, accuracy, destructiveness, efficiency. I almost went mad. But then, finally, a beautiful design. Large, clunky, absolutely ridiculous, but complete. It had everything I was looking for. The layout, the usability, the flying machines, the TNT efficiency, the 100% return rate. It was a masterpiece. So imagine my surprise when I was watching Hermitcraft one night and I saw Scar simply right-click on a block of copper and scrape off the oxidation. My eyes widened. This can't be. There's no way he just did that. I mean, this has to be one of those like quality of life improvement mods that they're running on the server, right? I mean, surely I can't just log into my game, take a wooden freaking axe, and just right-click. Oh, when did they add this? Let me check the wiki. Oh, okay, here it is. 21W11A. Oh, wait. Oh, that's the same one that introduced wax copper. Yeah, it pays to read sometimes. But this is what I ended up with right behind me. The Weathered Copper Factory, aka the coolest and most useless redstone machine I've ever made. So this giant brick of a machine basically oxidizes one stack of copper. I've had this set of 32 set up for level 1 oxidation and this one for level 2 oxidation, so really you only get half a stack of each, which admittedly is kind of small for a machine this big. So how do you actually use this thing, I may hear some of you asking. And so basically you just make your way into the machine. We have this bottom floor of glass, and as you can see you have several glass floors above us as well. And we have ladders to get in between them. So basically you just take your perfectly good unweathered blocks of copper and put them in front of each of these observers here. And if one of them is already triggered, like for the last run maybe all of them would be triggered, each of these little modules are also set up with a reset button. And there you go, it just lowers this piston and then sets a clock, and then you just keep putting down your copper blocks. Then you move on to the second level and go ahead and repeat the same thing. Now you would do this for all levels for the entire machine, or for basically however many slices of the machine that you want to go through. So from the side you can see that there's 4 slices. There's one slice here, there's one there, there's one there, and there's one there. And just to make it easier to see, I've gone ahead and removed one of the slices and isolated it just over here, including its own TNT blast chamber. We'll get to that in a second. But yeah, from here you can see that populating this machine is actually quite simple. All you have to do is just reset any of the modules that aren't reset by pushing this button here, and then just go ahead and put down your blocks of copper for the entire slice. Once the entire slice is filled out, you can kind of see that it forms this nice 4x4 grid of 16. And you can see that there are exactly 1, 2, 3, 4 blocks in between them in all directions. So we have here 1, 2, 3, 4 vertically as well. Now, if you've read the wiki on copper oxidization, you'll know that 4 blocks in between them is ideal, because each copper block counts within 4 blocks of itself how many copper blocks are in the same or lower state of oxidation, and actually that would prevent it from oxidizing, or at least it has a chance of preventing it from oxidizing. So spreading them out like this gives them the best chance to oxidize the quickest. Now it's a bit harder to see from the inside, but you can also see that a copper block would go there, and so side to side between the 2 slices you can see that it follows the 4 block gap rule as well. So how does each of these modules actually work? Well, it's comprised of basically 3 components. The first being the observer that watches the copper block and counts how many times it oxidizes. This one is set to 1, so as you can see, there is a redstone torch in this dropper here. This dropper is facing into another dropper. You'll see that there's another redstone torch there, and that's because it fired when I placed the block down. So in order to configure it for level 1 oxidation, I actually put 2 redstone torches in here. And as you can see, resetting the contraption simply turns off this torch, which retracts this piston, sends this clock, which basically just spams this dropper over and over, and then empties its contents into here. And that is basically how the system resets. So this observer pulses every single time that this piece of copper advances in its oxidation, and just keeps sending more and more items from this dropper into this dropper. Now once this dropper is empty, this comparator will turn off, thus depowering this block, and then turning this torch on. This torch turns on this redstone dust. This redstone dust being on top of a slab does not affect this piston next to it, but it does go into this 2-tick repeater, and it does affect this dispenser right here, which is filled with honeycomb. Now the reason that we have this on 2 ticks is because we want this dispenser to fire, thus waxing this piece of copper before it gets pushed down. Right over here actually you can see an example of one that fired, and if you check with F3 you can see on the right hand side that this says waxed exposed copper, and that's because it's been waxed by this dispenser and then pushed down with this piston. And the reason that this gets pushed down is so that it goes directly in line with this flying machine that will basically sweep everything. If you imagine this to be down here and this to be down here, you can kind of see it makes a line. And as it goes through that line, basically what it does is it catches the first one and then just kind of smushes all 4 of these copper blocks into a single line and goes into this contraption, which aligns them. We'll get into that one just a little bit later. But how does this flying machine know when to go? Well, of course, it would have to go only when all 4 of these modules have fired, right? So how do we detect that? Going back to this torch, in addition to being connected to this piece of redstone, you can see it's also powering this block here. So let's see what's going on with this block. You can kind of see on the other side here that there is a redstone torch. Pay no mind to that observer. It's looking at the torch, yes, but there are no consequences for it looking at the torch. But you can see that for every module that hasn't fired yet, this torch will be on, and this torch being on passes its power all the way down this line. And you can see that this is the case for other modules as well. This one hasn't fired, so this torch is on. But this module has fired, and now its torch is off. But even though its torch is off, the block that it's supposed to be powering is still powered because everything behind it is still powered. You can see the same goes for the last one as well. So from here, it might be easy to see that the only way for that block to stop receiving power is when all 4 of these torches are off. For those of you with keen eyes out there, you may have already noticed that this is a 4-way AND gate. You can see that all 4 of these torches need to be off in order for this block to be off. So what's so special about this block? Well, if we follow it, you can see that it is powering this repeater, which is powering this block, which is going into this torch, which is powering this piston, which is responsible for extending this observer over top of this note block, which then fires and activates this flying machine, sending it this way. Now I'm going to go to the bottommost floor because this is easiest to show you here. That brings us perfectly into this block aligner circuit, which is probably the coolest part of this whole system, but also the most highly over-engineered and turns out useless. We'll get to that assertion in a little bit. So what does this weird mangle of redstone actually do? Well, as you can see, this little slit right here going into this repeater is lined up perfectly with the blocks that are being pushed down. So that's the trajectory that the line of copper blocks is going to be coming into. So let's just go ahead and see what happens when a piece of waxed copper comes through and then passes in front of this repeater. You can see it very, very quickly gets moved down, gets pulled down, gets pushed once, and then gets pushed twice in this L shape. And that happens really, really fast. You can kind of see, there we go. And if it happens twice. So yeah, this mechanism is really fast, and that's because this flying machine is also relatively fast. So you can kind of see this thing needs to be able to handle a fast flow rate. That's basically as fast as I can place them, and it was able to handle it with ease. And now all 4 of these that used to be in a line in this orientation gets pushed and fed into this piston one by one, and then gets rotated 90 degrees and then put here. Okay, so in each line of copper blocks, I've taken this line and basically smushed them into a line and rotated them 90 degrees and put them specifically here. But why is that? Well, if I go ahead and zoom out, you can kind of see that 3 out of these 4 are already filled in. I just went ahead and did that manually. And you can kind of see that they are stacked right on top of each other with mostly air gaps on every side. This is important because this big, flat, weird flying machine then comes down and then pushes all 4 of these lines of blocks into a nice, neat 4x4, which ends up right down here in front of this piston wall and in front of this observer, which then fires out a TNT, which is right now missing from this dispenser because I don't want to blow anything up by accident. And then it's timed to perfection so that exactly when the TNT goes off, this entire wall fires. Now, if you didn't know, a block that is in motion actually has a very low blast resistance as compared to when it is stationary. So it turns out the copper block is actually quite strong. It is quite blast resistant. But when you move it and then blow it up at the same time, its blast resistance drops dramatically. And then, of course, the TNT has a 100% drop rate, so you get all 16 of your copper blocks back with one single TNT blast. Now back up to this flying machine, it can only be sent when all 4 of these lines are ready, right? So how do we detect that? Well, it's very similar to these 4-way AND gates that we have on each of these levels, because a way of detecting that all 4 of these lines are complete is essentially the same as detecting when all 16 of these modules have fired. Luckily for us, we have 4 nice AND gate outputs that are stacked right on top of each other. So each of these outputs can be ANDed together right at the top over here in this U-shaped piece of redstone to AND together all 4 of these 4-way AND gates, thus making basically a 16-way AND gate. And the output of this is this torch right here. That signal then travels along a really, really long repeater line. Now, the reason why it's so long is because we need to actually wait for this line to travel across with this flying machine and actually be built before we even dare to send this flying machine down. So that's what that big, long delay is for. And as you can see, it just gets longer and longer when you smush these together. Alright, so let's crank the random tick speed and just watch this last layer happen, hopefully, maybe, quickly enough. If it doesn't, I'll just go ahead and time-lapse it. Okay, there we go. You can see it come down. You can see this flying machine come through, sweep it up. We'll see it being fed into there, arranged into a line, and then shortly thereafter, there you go. You can see this flying machine come down, just barely scrape by, and smush it into, oh, hold on, I need a TNT. Okay, nope, I can't do it. Okay, oh, there's a TNT. Oh, is it gonna explode? Oh, it exploded. Man. Alright, take two. So we do have a piece of TNT in this dispenser now, so you can kind of see this wall comes down, drops in front of this this observer. The flying machine gets sent back up, the TNT is ignited, boom! And there we go, and you can see if I go ahead and clear my inventory, I get 16 back with 1 TNT blast. Pretty sweet. So basically that's what happens in each of these slices of 16. You can see that there's 4 of them side by side here, but you can also see that each of these blast chambers are quite staggered. And that's for the simple fact that these blast chambers are more than 3-4 blocks wide, so they can't be put next to each other. But they can be staggered like this, and yes, it does increase the time as we go from this slice all the way down to this slice, but fortunately for us, we're using flying machines to get our blocks over to the blast chambers, and when it comes to flying machines, they don't care. They're tough, you know, they can fly any distance that you want them to. So this one right here that has a journey that is this long doesn't even matter. It'll fly right the way through the air, and then all this right here is a nice self-contained system with its own little blast chamber. You can see that in this case, all 4 of the blast chamber's outputs are connected via a single water stream, and that single water stream gets brought all the way down to a single chest. Somehow a piece of honeycomb got in there. That's probably from some testing or something. So one last thing. I know I mentioned earlier that this block mover is both the coolest and most useless part of this big, cool, useless machine, but I never really explained why it's useless. I mean, surely taking these blocks and then putting them into an orientation that can be pushed down by this flying machine here is quite an essential task, right? Well, yes, it's an essential task, but turning it 90 degrees is completely unnecessary. I mean, surely if the blocks are coming in like this, well then why do they need to be turned at all? Why can't they just stay in this orientation? What's the need for it to be brought down 2 blocks and then over and then turned 90 degrees? This is actually a question that never occurred to me while I was building this thing about 1.5 years ago. It's a question that came up only a couple days ago while I was preparing this world for the showcase. I mean, really, there's no need for all this over-engineering, right? Well, I got curious about this question, so I went ahead and spent literally just a few minutes designing this, and it turns out, yeah, rotating it 90 degrees is completely unnecessary. Check this out, ready? So here comes the flying machine, as usual, just like in the other design. And watch this, ready? Boom. That's it. That is literally all that needed to happen. And you can see that this line is nice and perfectly separated from this flying machine, and also has nice air gaps on all four sides, ready for this flying machine to come down and push it into a nice 4x4. So just to hammer the point home, here comes the last layer. Boom. And then shortly thereafter, here comes the wall of a flying machine that comes right back down, pushes it into a nice 4x4 square, and into a blast chamber that I couldn't be bothered to build. Then it gets sent right back up. And look, it's still not tileable, but look at how much slimmer it is than this other design over here. I mean, it's unreal. It really is. Leave it to me to spend some time to improve a redstone contraption that was useless from the very start. Yeah, that's me. So there it is, the coolest and most useless redstone machine I have ever built. Hope you enjoyed the showcase, hope you found it interesting, and I also hope you learned something maybe, namely read the wiki. But other than that, I hope you found this video enriching in other ways. But before we leave, I'm very aware that this redstone contraption is very satisfying to watch. So for those of you who actually stuck around and didn't click off, I'm going to end this video with a nice little ASMR section of one slice working. Enjoy.